So, Castermind is one of my favorite videos I've made. The idea of Castermind was very fundamentally simple, and I wanted to make a video that almost entirely focused around its premise. I wanted it to specifically not be what Mimic DCI and Puppet Stuff were. Puppet Stuff was, hey, let me list almost every specific argument I can think of that I feel would be relevant or could fit in one video logistically. And even then, I kind of pushed it there. And with Mimic DCI, it was the complete opposite. It pretty much just said, hey, regardless of what the lore is, whether Tales Games is true or not, these are some possibilities. Castermind was written pure-blooded for explaining its idea and connecting its theories the way I thought they could be connected and work together. It worked with a lot of theories I had already established and talked about. It was not one where I wrote where I'm like, oh, I have to consider what stitched line games would mean for this. No, it was made purely for what I felt it worked with. That said, I probably could have made a generic version. I feel like the ideas of Castermind are pretty generic to an extent, or at least aren't super grounded in other theories. They just work best with the theories I put in that video. To refresh some of the core tenets and explain where this came from or why this was lined up or what it even is, Castermind just simply states, hey, what if Cassidy is Spooky Eyes / Glitch Fredbear in FNAF world based on the logbook dialogue? Cassidy is one of the only characters in general who ever references Psychic Friend Fredbear and the fact that he talks to people. Now granted, there are characters who are aware he exists. The local kids seem to be aware of him because of Plush Trap. William has him in the private room, obviously, and Mike obviously would know about him too. But it's interesting that Cassidy directly addresses the fact that the plush can talk. This also tells us that the original physical real-world Psychic Friend Fredbear also likely wasn't Cassidy. If Cassidy was that original Psychic Friend Fredbear, not only does that break the timeline and have Cassidy exist before they would die as a plush, which will require something like MCI at 83 or some theory that has the MCI happen before 83, but also why ask a question if you were the one talking to the bite victim? On top of knowing about who this character was to the bite victim, probably enough to quote him, which is an important requirement for Spooky Eyes and Glitch Bear as characters. They have to know what this line and what these things meant to the bite victim to be able to talk to him in this context at all. But also Cassidy has the obvious association with Fredbear and Golden Freddy, and obviously Glitch Bear, who is a variation on Fredbear, has heavy connections to Spooky Eyes, and they're either the same entity, I mean the color match is there for the eyes and the visual there, or at least it's something that's created on or talks on behalf of Spooky Eyes. And obviously the biggest point is Cassidy is the only confirmed character to interact with the bite victim prior to Happiest Day and after his death. If any other characters had these kinds of interactions with him, it is all entirely off screen. So you can see how the line is very quickly drawn between Glitch Fredbear and Cassidy. Cassidy has all of the requirements to be Glitch Fredbear, and there are not many other candidates, including the popular other rival characters that people put in this slot like William or Charlie, that really are shown to have these traits. Once again, going back to William and Charlie, while they might work, they just aren't shown interacting with the bite victim the way Cassidy is. Though obviously this video isn't just here to make arguments I've already made, I want to establish some new theories and ideas that kind of work or play off of Castermind. With the original video, I almost never talked about the books period. I wanted that to be as game line oriented as possible. Mainly because I like writing game oriented theories in general, but also because it feels like anytime you talk about Frights, it's poking a bear of 100 people who have different opinions. And of course, there's other questions like, what the hell does your take on Cassidy and Fredbear and everything that are the bite victim even be with the context of the books? Do you do parallels? Do you do Frights fiction? Do you do stitch line games? For this video, I want to propose something that never really made it to a proper script, but is a theory I've been toying with for a while. A sort of side evolution to parallels, stemming from a very similar core concept of using these things without them being in the continuity of the games. It's Frights clues. Now, note this can actually work with Frights fiction, or it can be its own standalone concept like parallels, but the idea of Frights clues and how it relates to the bite victim and Golden Freddy for this video is very simple. Instead of parallels logic of Andrew equals vengeful spirit, therefore Andrew things apply to Cassidy, Frights clues says, forget trying to graft on this character to another character in the games. Instead, Frights Clues says, hey, this idea is possible. The reason I'm putting Frights Clues in this video at all is because it has a very easy to understand application of this version. Clues just says, hey, it's possible for two spirits to inhabit one body as shown by this story. This story also teaches us that even if two spirits haunt one body, it doesn't mean they're sharing it equally. One of them could have completely predominant control over a spirit and could be that entity or suit or however you want to think of it, with the other spirit just being kind of in the back seat lingering. This can be used to create another side grade theory to a pre-existing theory, which is what I'll crudely nickname Golden 1.5. Unlike the classic Golden duo of Cassidy and the bite victim just haunting the suit equally or being both Golden Freddy, 1.5 specifies that much like how Jake is mostly in the pilot seat of the Stitch Wraith for most interactions and events, and Andrew just sometimes influences things, Cassidy is effectively Golden Freddy as the entity we think of. This thing appearing and haunting us and scaring us and doing all those amazing, weird, psychic ghost bear, whatever the hell you would call this shit half the time, that's Cassidy. The bite victim in this hypothetical 1.5 would just be another spirit tagging along. Similar to Andrew, he has some influence on the world around him. He is not completely unable to alter things, but he is not the main spirit. Clues effectively treats the Frights series more as a manual of what is possible or ideas to work with. Things like Jake helping Andrew move on are not saying, hey, the bite victim has to be the one to free Cassidy. It's saying, hey, this is how a spirit can free the others with positive memories and positive experiences. Now think about what that might mean in the original series context and see if there's any instances where this kind of logic or ability might apply. I know that's probably really easy to lump in with parallels, but functionally it changes a lot of how you handle different characters. It fundamentally changes what you're even looking for these theories. It still gives us info like the MCI can happen in 1985. It tells us that things can be supernatural or weird in the form of agony, without being haunted by dedicated souls. And through characters like Eleanor, it teaches us stuff like, hey, there can be beings that represent this evil and suffering and agony incarnate, and will act independently despite not being necessarily a dedicated spirit or character. This also makes it a little bit easier to understand what the criteria to be a theory would be with these books. Because with parallels, it's like, what defines a parallel, you know? I think what made parallels fall apart for a lot of people was when people started trying to connect things like Edwin to Henry, when there are connections there, like the fact that they work on animatronics, I guess, and have a kid who dies in an incident related to a car, but they are definitely not clean fits with each other. Using Edwin more as an example because he is the big one people got up in arms about, but I am trying to say this is more of a theory for Fright, not necessarily Tales. Just clarification before I go on to my next point, which is Clues is pretty clear about, hey, if this happens, think about how it happened and see if there's an instance of this happening prior. If it is shown that two spirits can haunt something with one being a predominant spirit, think about other instances where this might be the case. Hell, when it comes to applying new information to older information, this is typically what Stitchline game theories tend to do when it's not just saying, hey, Andrew's the vengeful spirit. It's saying like, hey, in addition to these theories we believe, this logic and stuff that happens here might be what's happening in the past. It's the same kind of approach. It just has the distinction that it's not in the literal continuity and more just a rulebook or guide to the approach of things. Andrew and Jake also tell us that characters can dig through the memories of other characters. It's just directly stated that he could dig through Andrew's memories to find where the things that Andrew had infected were. Therefore, that could explain how Cassidy would know what happened with psychic friend Fredbear and everything that went down in the bite victim's life. That theory also segues into a general theory I do want to pass around to more of the community and see what people think about, which was talked about by Jokey Quinn on Reddit, and I think it might have existed in some context prior, but this is the version I specifically want to talk about, which is the idea that the minigames we see in FNAF 4 are sort of the bite victim stuck in a sort of loop of his original memories, or just at least re-experiencing his memories, or at least just in this instance living through his original past events, with Cassidy peering into those memories as the plush, trying to see what happened, to see how to help it. In this context, the order of events would be the original versions of events where the bite victim lived and had William as the plush talking to him. His soul moves on to any of the possible destinations. Then we have the two meet for whatever the first time is. This might be off screen effectively. Then Cassidy goes through bite victim's memories to figure out what's going on, including interacting with him potentially as the plush. Maybe there's a bit of both where it's like, hey, these things were said by William in the real version of events, but then there's these new things being interjected and messed with by Cassidy coming. That could explain why things like Mangle are there that seem to imply they're from a later point in time. It could just be that this is not a completely liminal, logical version of events, and more just this weird recreation of it. That also might explain why the plush seems to be somewhat supernatural in this game overall, or at least why it would appear in multiple places. Now, I could see an argument where someone could say, hey, why would there be a flat line in the dream recreation? But at the same time, why wouldn't there be? If this is a weird recreation of what happened to him, that would include him remembering himself dying. It also maybe could imply why the plushes and stuff fade away as Cassidy is leaving the experience and returning him back to the void where he'll be in FNAF World and then Logbook. After the bite victim's mini recreated life goes down, Cassidy now understands what happened to the bite victim, his birthday, and everything that went down, and has the full context of who he is to appear in the logbook, where it's like, hey, I know the party was for you, I know this thing talked to you, I'm trying to help you remember and understand it all together. And then, with that information, can start the process of Castermind in FNAF World, trying to put the pieces in place for him, trying to get him to happiest day, should he be the happiest day receiver. Well, I'm sure there might be an argument made that it's a little clunky in some spots. I think it's an interesting way to look at it all, and if you really want a physical explanation for why things would be different or things to appear in different time periods than we think they should be, then this theory does offer that, and does give a look into why these things might happen these ways. Now, this is another kind of part of the script that got a little cut because it was pretty messy. But it is worth talking about what the hell does the bite victim do after he dies? Because, I mean, I talked about Golden 1.5 earlier, of how we could have a different way to work Fredbear and him being in Fredbear. But there's kind of no way to work the bite victim without it fucking having something weird going on in it. In the original Castermind video, I was pretty ambiguous about what I thought happened to the bite victim and where I thought he went. I kind of loosely operated on this logic that I'll just call void victim, for lack of a better term, where the bite victim doesn't really have a specific end destination as a soul and just kind of sits in the void. Which there really isn't a glaring reason it can't be the case. We've had moments in extended material where this kinda happened. Pete from Step Closer saw his limbs be taken for his organ donation and stuff like that, even though he was dead. And then Alone Together and Tails kind of had something maybe approaching this, but both are not fully cleanly lining up with this is the thing. This is a soul who for some reason cannot see, has access to other souls, and seems to persist wherever is needed to be. Maybe if you take the inherent idea of a soul doesn't need to be bound to a vessel to be a ghost, that can work. But at the same time, it's just a concept that's not fully explained or given a lot of details in regards to. I feel like when you're playing FNAF 4, the most obvious thing you would want to say would be he possesses Fredbear. He gets bit by Fredbear. It feels like the entire game's foreshadowing it with his character being Psychic Friend Fredbear, and that should be pretty straightforward, but at the same time, how far does possession go for this kind of thing? Does the bite victim having trauma and association and consistent memories associated with Fredbear and being stuck in Fredbear's jaws or who know how long, does that count as him transferring his soul in there? I mean, I guess we did have the whole rants across the various material about oh, the whole point of Remnant is souls going into material and metal and all that, and their emotions and memory bonding to materials and all that. That's the entirety of Agony, Possession, Remnant, and all that shit. So I mean, if the idea is it's memory and suffering transferring to something, then he has both those things with Fredbear. But if the idea is you die and you have to be connected to or in close proximity to something, then I guess it can't work. But at the same time, I feel like the series has given enough leeway where it isn't completely bound to you have to touch or be very, very close to something to die to it. At the same time, it also hasn't clarified that this kind of possession could happen the other way around, where you don't need to be close to something and you just possess it anyway. It kind of exists living in the limbo and ambiguity of how possession works. If you want a very literal, you have to die and be near something for your soul to go into it, then technically the only two things he could possess, if that's the core logic, if the idea is you have to be near something when you die for your soul to go into it, then your only options are Fredbear, Plush, and Mike, really. I mean, William might have been there near the bite victim's death, but if he was, we didn't see it, or he didn't have clearly established dialogue. All we have is Psychic Friend Fredbear. But then it's kind of one of those, if that's the case, why does Psychic Friend Fredbear never seem to demonstrate any supernatural properties in sister location, or get any demonstrated moments of that happening? Also, is Mike taking around Psychic Friend Fredbear and grabbed him off screen? If he's following around Mike, why is that not strongly implied anywhere in the logbook? If he does possess the plush, it does make me wonder, does the phrase, does he still talk to you, is that a message to Mike saying hey, does the bite victim still talk to you, pointing to the plush? I mean, I feel like on paper, the bite victim possessing the plush should make sense. It just feels like there's not this full commitment to that idea to make it clearly the path to go. But maybe Scott was trying to point us to that theory with the whole, does he still talk to you? It's just kind of a pick your poison situation where no matter what option you pick, it seems like there's some hurdle you kind of have to adjust to or get used to with the idea. Right now, personally, I would either sidle between the Fredbear plush or Fredbear itself. Fredbear plush makes the most literal sense with the possession we have, whereas Fredbear seems to make a lot of symbolic sense and also explains the connection between Cassidy and the bite victim and why this specific spirit is the one that's interacting with him so consistently. Especially with Frights, the way that dual possession seems to work for one suit does seem to match to an extent with how Cassidy and bite victim work. And that's beyond Frights fiction, stitchline games, clues, or parallels, or whatever the hell you want to argue for the book. If it sounds like I'm not taking some definitive stances on some of these ideas, I mean, there's a reason none of this made it into the main video. Like I said, either I didn't know about some of this stuff, or I just find the topic so complicated that it's kind of hard to work it into one overall theory and concept. I do want to make it clear that this is a bonus video for a reason. These are not hard set things that I 100% believe and are just going to be the standard for every video moving forward. These are concepts I want to talk about and pass to the community. I mean, almost all of my videos are, but like I said, it's a bonus video. This is kind of an extra layer deep of like, hey, these are some interesting ideas to toy with and talk about that didn't really fit the original video cleanly. Gold 1.5 isn't my new definitive stance on what the bite victim's soul is or where he is. It's more of a, if he is in Fredbear, this is how I think it would work. Frights Clues is kind of my theory now for how Frights works other than Frights fiction. I think it more puts into words how a lot of people have been using the books. And in general, there's been a lot of theorists who've just focused more on the this idea transfers to this idea rather than this character transfers to this character. But I wanted to give it kind of more of an established name and clear set of rules because I think that's something that Parallels really struggled with was what are the rules to Parallels? And I also felt that a lot of the times the parallels weren't warranted and I wanted to isolate what about parallel theories I thought did work. And Memory Plush, does this have a name? This idea of like the rewinded time, almost like reliving the past concept with Cassidy through the plush. I don't know if that has an official name. Once again, I'm not sure if that's my new definitive take on what's going on with the plush, but it's an interesting way to interpret these events and explain some of the future things that are leaking in. There's also a loose idea I've toyed with, which is called, for lack of a better term, like re-dream theory, which was more the idea of explaining Golden Freddy's weird anomalous powers with dream properties, kind of like what we saw with Moving Golden Freddy. Because this has always bugged me, what exactly does Golden Freddy do to kill you in the game? Golden Freddy just kind of appears and brah! Or flying ahead at you, like what are those? What is that supposed to represent? And the idea of like redream was loosely like, oh, is Golden Freddy like shutting down your mind basically? Like I said, linking to the dream altering concept, altering your mind to effectively make you brain dead was one idea I thought of. Or just inducing such shock instantly that it causes you to have a heart attack. Or honestly, with the movie establishing that Golden Freddy can literally teleport, at least in one continuity, maybe it literally is a magic golden bear head flying at you that kills you. But you know, you might just say, that's just a theory.